Every day, millions of people look at the tiny watch on their wrist without thinking about how extraordinary it really is. A few centimeters of metal, glass, gears, and springs can tell us the exact time almost anywhere. But the wristwatch was not created overnight. So who invented the wristwatch? When was the first one made? And why did people once prefer carrying watches inside their pockets? The answer is far more fascinating than you might expect. The wristwatch is not the invention of just one person. It is the result of centuries of miniaturization, mechanical engineering, fashion, aviation, and even war. Today, we're going back through history to discover how the wristwatch was born, and how a small timepiece eventually changed the way the world keeps time. To understand the wristwatch, we first need to understand humanity's obsession with time. Long before watches existed, people measured time using nature. The movement of the sun created the earliest practical clocks. Sundials used shadows to indicate the passage of hours. Water clocks measured time through the controlled movement of water. Candle clocks and other simple devices later gave people ways to estimate time even when the sun was not visible. But these devices had one major limitation. You couldn't simply put them in your pocket. Humanity needed something smaller. Something mechanical. Something that could keep time wherever a person went. During the Middle Ages, mechanical clocks began appearing in European cities. These enormous machines used gears, weights, and mechanical mechanisms to measure the passage of time. They were impressive, but they were anything but portable. A clock could occupy an entire tower. The next great challenge was obvious. Could humans take the machinery inside a giant clock and make it small enough to carry? That challenge would lead to one of the greatest technological transformations in the history of timekeeping. By the 16th century, watchmakers had begun producing portable mechanical timepieces. These early watches were expensive, complicated, and often inaccurate compared with modern standards. They were also very different from today's wristwatch. People could carry them as small personal objects, sometimes attached to clothing or worn as jewelry. In 1571, Queen Elizabeth I of England was reportedly given an arm watch, an early example of a timepiece associated with being worn on the arm. But for centuries, the wristwatch remained a curiosity rather than an everyday necessity. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, watches increasingly became associated with jewelry. For wealthy women, a watch could be both a timekeeper and a beautiful piece of personal decoration. But there was still a technical problem. Making a mechanical movement small enough to fit into jewelry required extraordinary craftsmanship. Every gear had to be tiny. Every spring had to work correctly. And the entire mechanism had to fit inside a very small case. Then, in the early 19th century, one remarkable commission changed the story. In 1810, Caroline Murat, Queen of Naples and sister of Napoleon Bonaparte, commissioned the famous watchmaker Abraham Louis Breguet to create an unusual timepiece. She wanted a watch that could be worn on the wrist. Breguet's archives record the order dated June 8, 1810. The resulting watch, known as Breguet No. 2639, was an exceptionally thin oval repeating watch mounted on a wristlet made from hair and gold thread. This is widely regarded as the first known purpose-made wristwatch. But there is an important detail. The first wristwatch was not immediately adopted by everyone. In the 19th century, wristwatches were primarily associated with women and jewelry. Men generally preferred pocket watches. A pocket watch was considered practical, respectable, and appropriate for business and professional life. The wristwatch was still seen largely as an elegant accessory. But another watchmaker would soon create an important milestone. In 1868, Patek Philippe created a wristwatch for Countess Koskowicz of Hungary. The watch was designed specifically to be worn on the wrist, with a bracelet integrated into its design. Patek Philippe considers this piece the first Swiss wristwatch. It is an important milestone because it shows that wrist-worn watches were no longer just experimental curiosities. Watchmakers were actively designing sophisticated timepieces specifically for the wrist. But men still had little reason to abandon the pocket watch. Until practical circumstances began changing. Imagine riding a horse while trying to pull a pocket watch from your coat. Imagine climbing, traveling, or working with both hands occupied. Checking the time suddenly became much easier if the watch was already attached to your wrist. And one group of people discovered this advantage very quickly. Soldiers. By the late 19th century, military personnel were increasingly experimenting with wrist-worn watches. A watch on the wrist could be checked quickly without reaching into a pocket. That mattered when timing movements, coordinating operations, or working on horseback. What had once been considered jewelry was becoming a practical tool. The transformation was beginning. But one man would help turn the wristwatch into a symbol of modern life. In the early 20th century, aviation introduced a completely new problem. Brazilian aviation pioneer Alberto Santos Dumont needed to keep both hands available while flying. Checking a pocket watch during flight was inconvenient. So he turned to his friend, Louis Cartier. Cartier designed a watch that could be worn on the wrist and easily read while flying. The result became one of the most famous early men's wristwatches. The watch created for Santos Dumont in 1904 became known as the Santos. It was practical, distinctive, and designed for a man who needed quick access to the time. Cartier later developed the design commercially. Suddenly, the wristwatch had a new image. It wasn't merely a piece of jewelry. It was a tool for modern men. Aviation had helped change the way society looked at the wristwatch. Then came the event that would transform the wristwatch forever. World War I. Soldiers needed to coordinate movements and operations. A pocket watch was difficult to access in the middle of combat. A wristwatch could be checked instantly. Soldiers could synchronize their actions without constantly reaching into their pockets. The wristwatch had become a practical military instrument. And when millions of people saw soldiers using them, public attitudes began to change. After the war, the wristwatch no longer seemed strange. Men had seen its practical advantages firsthand. Manufacturers responded by producing more durable and affordable designs. The pocket watch slowly began losing its dominance. The wristwatch was smaller, faster to check, easier to carry, and increasingly fashionable. By the 1920s, the wristwatch was becoming the standard choice for everyday timekeeping. But making a reliable wristwatch was not simple. Inside the case was an entire mechanical world. Tiny gears transferred energy. Springs stored power. An escapement controlled the release of that energy. A balance wheel oscillated back and forth. And the hands translated those microscopic movements into something humans could see. The wristwatch was essentially a tiny mechanical machine designed to measure time. Here's how a traditional mechanical wristwatch works. When you wind the watch, energy is stored inside a tiny spring called the mainspring. As the spring slowly unwinds, it releases energy through a series of gears. But if that energy were released all at once, the hands would spin immediately. That's where the escapement comes in. It controls the release of energy in tiny, regular intervals. The balance wheel oscillates back and forth, creating the rhythm that ultimately becomes the ticking of the watch. As wristwatches became more popular, people wanted them to become tougher. What if a watch could survive rain? What if it could resist dust? What if someone could actually wear it while swimming? Watchmakers began developing better cases, seals, crystals, and winding systems. These improvements transformed the wristwatch from a delicate accessory into a reliable, everyday instrument. One major milestone came with waterproof case technology. Rolex introduced the Oyster case in 1926, designed with a screw-down system that helped protect the movement from dust and water. This was another major step in making the wristwatch practical for everyday life. The watch was no longer something that needed to be protected from the world. Increasingly, it was designed to survive the world. During the Second World War, the wristwatch became even more important. Soldiers, pilots, sailors, and engineers depended on reliable timekeeping. Watches were designed for visibility, durability, and practical use. Some featured luminous markings so they could be read in darkness. The wristwatch had completed an extraordinary transformation. It had gone from royal jewelry to military equipment, and then into everyday civilian life. After World War II, the wristwatch became a global symbol of modern life. In America, Europe, and many other parts of the world, people wore watches to work, school, travel, and social events. A wristwatch could say something about its owner. It could be practical. It could be luxurious. It could be sporty. Or it could simply be a reliable tool. The tiny machine on the wrist had become part of everyday culture. But another technological revolution was coming. Electronics were beginning to change timekeeping. Instead of relying entirely on mechanical gears and springs, engineers discovered that quartz crystals could be used to keep remarkably accurate time. When electricity passes through quartz, the crystal vibrates at a highly stable frequency. Electronics can measure those vibrations and convert them into precise time signals. The age of the quartz watch had arrived. Quartz technology changed the watch industry dramatically. Suddenly, watches could become extremely accurate while using relatively simple electronic systems. Digital displays began replacing traditional hands on some watches. Numbers appeared directly on the screen. For many consumers, this looked like the future. Mechanical watchmaking faced enormous competition. But mechanical watches did not disappear. Instead, mechanical watches became something different. They became symbols of craftsmanship. A mechanical watch could contain hundreds of tiny components assembled by skilled hands. Some movements required extraordinary precision. Watchmakers decorated bridges, polished gears, and carefully adjusted mechanisms. The wristwatch was no longer just about telling time. It had become engineering, art, craftsmanship, and personal expression. Then another challenge appeared. The smartphone. Suddenly, almost everyone carried a device that could display the exact time. Why would anyone still need a watch? The answer was surprisingly simple. People didn't wear watches only to know the time. They wore them because watches had become part of their identity. A watch could represent style, achievement, history, craftsmanship, or personal taste. And then the wristwatch evolved again. Smartwatches combined the traditional idea of a wrist-worn timepiece with modern electronics. Instead of showing only the hour and minute, a smartwatch could display notifications, track activity, provide navigation, and connect to a smartphone. The wristwatch had once again changed its role. But the basic idea remained the same. Put useful information somewhere you can access instantly. So, who invented the wristwatch? The most accurate answer is not simply one name. Abraham Louis Breguet created the first known purpose-made wristwatch for Queen Caroline Murat in 1810. Patek Philippe created an important early Swiss wristwatch in 1868. Louis Cartier helped establish the modern men's wristwatch with the Santos watch for Alberto Santos Dumont in 1904. And World War I helped turn the wristwatch from a niche accessory into an essential practical tool. The history of the wristwatch is much more than the story of a small machine. It is the story of human curiosity. We wanted to understand time. Then we wanted to measure it. Then we wanted to carry it. And finally, we wanted it directly on our wrist. From the extraordinary watch created for a queen in 1810 to the sophisticated timepieces of today, the wristwatch has traveled through royalty, engineering, aviation, war, fashion, electronics, and modern technology. A device that once looked like jewelry became a tool for soldiers. A tool became a symbol of status. And today, it has evolved into a miniature computer on the wrist. So the next time you look at your watch, remember what you're really looking at. Not just hours and minutes, but more than 2 centuries of human invention, craftsmanship, and innovation. The wristwatch may be small, but its history is enormous.